seated. God's primary redemption act in the Old Testament was the Exodus. He led his people out of slavery. In fact, one of God's favorite phrases in the Old Testament is, "I brought you up out of Egypt." And so we're going to spend some time over the next couple of weeks talking about the Egyptians and the Exodus, kind of leading up to the death of the firstborn in Exodus and resurrection that we'll be talking about at Easter Sunday. But the question I have for this morning to kind of want to remind you of is we're going to talk about the Exodus, but one question is, how did they get there? How did they get to Exodus to begin with? And it wasn't punishment. They weren't being punished because they had done something wrong. It wasn't that God was executing judgment on them. They were in Egypt because of God's protection. God was taking care of them, and that's how they ended up in Egypt to begin with. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of a story with a couple of applications. Now, to kind of get the story right, you have to go back to Jacob and Esau. So hopefully you remember Jacob and Esau. They were twins. Jacob was smooth-skinned. He was a man of the tents. He was a favorite of his mom. Esau, he's kind of a hairy guy. He's a guy of the field. He's a hunter. He's the oldest, and he's the favorite of the dad, Isaac. So if you remember the Esau-Jacob story, remember Esau sold his birthright. He came in one day, he was hungry. So he traded his birthright for a bowl of soup, basically. And then later, if you remember, Jacob, it got time for the father's blessing. And when Isaac was going to give Esau his blessing, he told him to go out and kill some food and bring it back and fix it for me. You know how I like it, son, right? So Rebekah, the mom, hears about that, and she creates this deception where Jacob gets the blessing instead of Esau. And so when Esau gets back, there's no blessing to give. And he says, "Come on, Dad, don't you have a blessing left for me?" He said, "Man, I gave it to your younger brother." Now, if you were in that family and your older brother had done that to you, you would probably feel like the older brother felt about the younger brother in this story. He wanted to kill him. But he wasn't going to kill him yet. He was going to wait till Dad died, and then he was going to kill him because he didn't want to upset his father too much. So Rebekah hears about Esau's plan, so she takes Jacob and says, "Look, you got to go to my brother Laban, and you just go live with him till Esau cools off, and then maybe you can come back home." This is a Greg Smith paraphrase. So he goes down to see Laban. Now, when he gets to see Laban, that's when the baby wars start. At least that's what I call them. It's the baby wars. So here's what happened. Laban has a daughter. He has two daughters. It says Leah has beautiful eyes. And it says Rachel is lovely of form. Well, Jacob kind of likes Rachel. So he wants to marry her. So he comes up with this, Laban comes up with this plan. So you work for me 7 years, and then I'll give you her as your wife. So he's like, "Okay, we'll do that." Do y'all remember the story? So he works 7 years, gets time for the wedding night, and we have the wedding. And I don't really understand all the things that happen in the Bible sometimes, so you just kind of let them go the way that they go. But he wakes up the next morning, and guess what? Wrong daughter, right? It was Leah, it wasn't Rachel. So, well, you work for me another 7 years, and I'll give you Rachel, but I'll go ahead and give her to you now. You just work for me 7 more years. Well, that started this kind of deal because Leah, and it says she was not hated, she's the least loved. So God, seeing that she's not loved as much as Rachel, she opens her womb, so she starts giving birth to children. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. And Rachel's over there saying, "Well, how come I can't have any kids?" So Rachel decides, well, then I will give my husband my maid, Bilhah, and he can have children through her, so then I can have children, right? So there's Dan and Naphtali. Leah quit having children, so she, well, I'll do the same thing. I'll give my handmaid to a really crazy story, but it's in there, right? So Zilpah, and so then there's Gad and Asher, and then Leah starts having children again, so there's Issachar and Zebulun, and finally Rachel has a child, Joseph, and then sometime after that, Benjamin. Now, here's why that's important. This is why the baby wars are important. Joseph is the favorite. He's the favorite. There's not any other way to put it. He is the firstborn son of the wife that Jacob loves the most, and so he becomes the favorite. And you know all about this because who got the coat of many colors? Y'all can talk, it's all right. Joseph got the coat of many colors, right? He was the one that was the favorite. Now, because he's the favorite, what do all the other brothers think about him? Not so much, right? And so one thing Joseph did is he brought a bad report about his brothers to his father. That didn't go over very well. So one day, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers. As he goes to check on his brothers, and they see him coming. Oh, here comes the dreamer, right? Remember he had the dreams about things going to bow down to him. Oh, here comes the dreamer. Here comes a guy that thinks he's special. Here comes a guy that's got the coat of many colors. Why don't we just get rid of him? We just kill him. And Judah says, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And you think, well, Judah's trying to do something really nice here. Judah's not trying to try to do something nice here. Now, the older brother Reuben, he's got in mind he's going to rescue him, but Judah sells him while Reuben's not there. And so what we have is Joseph being sold into slavery. They take him down to Egypt, and you kind of know how that works. Now, I can't do the whole Joseph story because there's just a couple of things that I really want you to see. And here are the two things that I want you to take away. Deliverance might not look like deliverance, and redemption and repentance highlight God's interaction with humanity. And we're going to look at that inside this Joseph story about how the Israelites get to the land of Egypt. So let's tackle the first one first. Deliverance might not look like deliverance when God starts to act in your life. Back in Abraham, God promised Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, to your offspring I will give this land. I mean, you remember that story? Abraham set out and he was going somewhere when he didn't know where he was going. And God said, but I'm going to give this land to you and your offspring. And when God makes a promise, God is always, He's always faithful to His promise. And even way back in Genesis chapter 15, God knew that they were going to Egypt. He said, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years, but I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. So all the way back in Genesis with Abraham, God understood, hey, they're going to go to slavery. They're going to go to Egypt for a while. Now, they went down to Egypt because of the famine. But even to Abraham, God told him, He said, in the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here. So there's going to be a time that your descendants are going to come back to where you are right now after they go through this time of oppression. So the point of that is God's not surprised by what's happening. God has His hands in everything that is happening. So when we look at the Joseph story, we're looking at it from this perspective, looking back. And we see God's hand and God's providence, and we see what God does. So we look back and we say, man, look how God protected the Israelites through Joseph and how He saved their lives. But if you were Joseph or you were Jacob, right in the middle of deliverance, that might not quite look like deliverance. So when Joseph was sold into slavery, he didn't go with a smile on his face. Right? They didn't get ready to sell Joseph into slavery, and he says, oh boy, I'm going to get to go into slavery. I'm going to get to save my family. How do you know how he went? Genesis 42 is this real interesting encounter. So Joseph is sold into slavery. This is at least 20 years later. 20 years he hadn't seen his brothers. 20 years his brothers hadn't seen him. They go down to buy grain in Egypt, and of course Joseph is second in command because that's God's providence. And Joseph recognizes the brothers, but the brothers don't recognize Joseph. Now that had to be, in some ways, I can see that he might have had a smile on his face there. Now, they're speaking Hebrew, and he's using an interpreter, so they don't know that he can understand what they're saying. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Like people were talking, but they thought they were doing it in a way that you couldn't understand them, but you could actually understand what they were saying? We were on a tour bus, and I forget where in Greece we were, but we're on this tour bus, so the driver... There's a driver on the tour bus, and then there's a guy standing by the door. He's kind of crowd control. And so they're just talking to one another in Greek, and all of these people are pretty much speaking English that's on the bus. And I thought, I wonder what they're saying. So I started listening to them. You know what they were complaining about? Because I thought they're going to be saying, man, these tourists have got to go. That's what I thought they were going to be complaining about. But they weren't. What they were complaining about is they were complaining about the other people who were driving on the road that didn't know how to drive, because you had a one-lane road and you had big buses going both ways, and we were all just stuck. I mean, we were just stuck right there. And they were like, I don't know why he brought that bus down this road. He should have known. He let us get out first. And so that's what they were complaining about. But they didn't know I could hear. I just sat there, smiled, and listened to their conversation. Well, here, they don't know that Joseph can understand. So he's looking at his brothers. This is what they say. Surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. When Joseph went into slavery, he was begging his brothers not to sell him. Begging them. And they did it anyway. And now there they are. They're in Egypt. Joseph can understand them. There's all kind of cool things about that in that story that you need to read that later, right? I just can't get it all in the sermon. Here's the point. When Joseph is in slavery, when Joseph is in prison, when Joseph is put into prison because of Potiphar's wife, when he acted nobly and she said that he didn't, I doubt very seriously that Joseph understood that that was all about deliverance in that moment. Probably didn't look like deliverance to him. Probably didn't look like deliverance to his father. For 30 years, his father thought he was dead. Can you imagine just the pain and the turmoil and the struggle and the hurt? At the moment that they're in the deliverance, it doesn't look like deliverance. They can't see the end of the picture. They can't see what God was doing. Now, in Genesis chapter 45, Joseph comes to the point in his life where he understands that. And this is what he says. I don't think I put this on the screen. So, Genesis 45, verse 7. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep you alive for many survivors. It is not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all of his house and ruler of all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go get my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down for me, do not tarry. Joseph came to the understanding, who sent him to Egypt? Oh, God. Oh, he even says to his brothers, you intended it for harm, but God intended it for good. But in the middle of everything that's happening, he doesn't always understand it's for good. I think that's like us so many times. I mean, we're in a moment, and we can't see the future. We don't understand how God is using providence. We can't see at that moment how God is moving all the things in the world around for our advantage. And we just don't understand that deliverance really looks like deliverance. We don't understand that losing one job might lead to a better job, or one roadblock in life opens up an incredible opportunity somewhere, or a tragic moment turns into something that is joy in a way that we really can't imagine. And I don't mean by that every difficulty in life leads to something greater, but so many times that's how God is working and we just can't see it. So for those who were Israelites living in the land of Egypt, to know that God was coming in deliverance, to know that they were there because of God's deliverance. But there's something really unique about this story as well. And that's redemption and repentance highlight God's interaction with humanity. Let me see how I'm doing on time. If you look at the life of Joseph, it looks like Joseph has pretty much got everything under control, doesn't it? I mean, just think of his story. Okay, he's sold into slavery, but when he goes into slavery, God blesses his life. He goes to a high position in Potiphar's household. He's falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, but he continues to trust God. He goes to prison. He gets to a high position in prison. He interprets the dreams. He's forgotten about by 2 years, and I'm sure for 2 years he's in that jail cell saying, I thought that guy was going to remember me when he got out, but it took him 2 years to remember. And he said, oh yeah, I know this guy Joseph, he can interpret dreams, is what he's told Pharaoh. So then Pharaoh rises to second in command in all of Egypt. He's only second to Pharaoh himself. And you look at Joseph's life and he understands providence and he's trusting God and he knows God's working through his life. Toward the end of his life, he knows that God came to show, to use him to bring prosperity to his family, to keep them from starving to death. So when you start thinking about the descendants and the lineage of Jesus, you think, man, Joseph is just an incredible guy. So I am sure that Joseph is in the lineage of Jesus. Except what? He's not. He's not. It says that Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Judah. Now think about that for a second. Whose idea was it to sell Joseph into slavery? Judah. Yeah. Later in Genesis, who goes through this process of deception with his daughter-in-law and eventually ends up having a child, twins with his daughter-in-law because he thought she was a prostitute. Who was that guy? Judah. So, and do you remember what he wanted to do when he found out she was pregnant? Oh, bring her out here. We'll burn her. And she said, oh, really? You remember in that whole transaction, she took his staff and his cord and his signet ring, and she said, oh, you wouldn't happen to know who belongs to these, would you? And he was like, uh-oh. Judah. And you think, why Judah? Because God always deals with us with redemption and repentance. See, the interesting thing about Judah is Judah became a changed man. Yeah, at the beginning of that story, yeah, he was the one that was sold Joseph. It's his idea. He wanted to get rid of his brother. He was deceived, and he deceived others. If you remember what they did with Joseph's coat, soaked it in blood, took it to their dad. And Isaac said, well, he must have been killed by a wild animal. They didn't say, oh, no, he wasn't really. We just sold him. No, they let him think he had been killed by a wild animal. He deceived others. Then he was deceived by others because he was deceived by Tamar. And then somewhere through that process, Judah becomes a different kind of individual. I don't know exactly in the text where it was or exactly the moment in his life where he changed. I don't know. I can't isolate that for you. But I know what happens in Genesis chapter 44. They haven't figured out Joseph is Joseph yet. They just think he's a ruler in Egypt. Joseph has made them leave behind one brother so that they would bring another brother, Benjamin, his younger brother, to Egypt. And they do. Joseph creates this scenario where it looks like Benjamin is going to have to become his slave forever. And Judah steps up. And long story short, he says to Joseph, my father's lost one son, and if he loses another, he'll die. How about you take me instead? How about I trade places with him? Isn't that a remarkable difference? Isn't it a remarkable difference from going to, let's sell our brother into slavery, to, let me change places. I'll take his place. I'll become your servant. And you think, well, yeah, but it's just kind of a Bible story, but would you have done the same thing? He's going to go into slavery there for his brother and leave his family and his kids, the things that he knows, his comforts. See, when I look at Judah, what I see is a man of incredible repentance and change. And so that makes me ask a question. God, why Judah? Why put Judah in the lineage of Jesus? Why not Joseph? He was such a good guy. And you know why? I think because Judah's story is our story. We're just like him. Joseph was the one who understood that God's purposes were greater than his own. Joseph was the good one. Judah, not so much. But I think that's why he's in the lineage of Jesus. He represents us in our struggle, in our sin, our self-centeredness, our rashness, our arrogance, and our repentance, and our changed hearts, and our redemption, and our salvation. We are Judah. And that's why Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. See, God's going to do a great thing in the Old Testament. He's going to bring them out of slavery. We're going to talk about it over the next couple of weeks. He's going to use remarkable people to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. He's going to do things in history that maybe no people have ever seen before. And we'll look back on something like that and say, man, if I could have just seen what God did in Egypt, then maybe I'd have been like them. But you know, God has done something far greater for us than he did for anybody that he brought out of Egypt. If you want to look at the power of God that we know in the world, the power of the God that we see in the world is far greater than what they were seeing. In fact, so much so that the writer of Hebrews says, only with us would they be made perfect. Only with us. We are witnesses and we are participants in God's greatest blessing in all of history. And that is redemption through Jesus Christ. Because we are Judah. So what do you need to know? Well, sometimes whatever you're going through right now, deliverance doesn't always look like deliverance. And when you're right in the middle of it, you may not can see the end. And God is so wonderful. God can see the end and see where you're going. He's like, hey, you're going to be fine, but we're just going to have to trust in him as we go through the journey. The second part of that is, man, as you go through that journey, you're going to end up in a lot of places, maybe like Judah. We're not perfect and we don't always get it right. But God, in his immense, incredible love, says, I know, but you're mine. And I can promise you, if God can use Judah, God can use you. The question is, do you trust God enough to let him? If you need to respond in some way to the invitation, I'm going to ask you to do that while we stand and sing.